I want to take some time to talk about the subject of shame because I believe it is a critical area for all of us to address in our lives. If you want to live healthy from the heart and experience healing, freedom, and heart transformation, you'll have to address the issue of shame. I find it to be a very unproductive, unhelpful emotion that many people struggle with at a deep level. It's not just something you feel. It's often something we wear. It's like a cloud that can surround certain subjects of our heart. And it really messes with our sense of identity, our sense of belonging, our whole perspective. So I think it's very important that we understand shame, because whenever you touch on the areas of pain, you touch on the areas of emptiness, hit on any areas of failures, flaws, weaknesses, sins, struggles, shame is going to want to come in to dilute the whole perspective so that you don't experience productive healing. In fact, shame will seek to prevent people from experiencing healing at all because you can't even see the issue the way God sees it through His love and His grace. Now, some people would say, I don't even have any issues with shame. I don't have any shame issues. But when you begin to get near some of the tender issues and areas of their heart that they've blocked themselves off, you can see all kinds of discomfort. We have a lot of defense mechanisms relationally that come as a result of shame. We shame ourselves and we shame other people. And so it really infects our relationship. It started in the Garden of Eden and it's been wanting to attack us ever since. And the enemy knows if he can use shame to cloud the perspective in your life, it creates a lens and it's going to distort how you see yourself and won't allow you to then productively move through areas of healing in your life. So we first need to define what shame is. Now, what I want to do is I want to give you a working definition of shame and how you evaluate it in your own life. And before I get into that, we need to understand that shame has to do with places of vulnerability. These are the places in our heart, the meaningful treasure. When we talk about the heart, we're talking about the treasured place. And so many of us don't live out of the heart. We live in a kind of a fabricated, shallow world. So we don't always deal with the issues of the heart effectively in our life. When we talk about the vulnerable issues, the true treasured places, this now gets into the deeper you and understanding. And what shame comes in, it produces a painful sense. And here's some words I'm going to use to help us understand the language, understand the emotions of this, is a sense of humiliation and embarrassment. Now, embarrassment is that self-consciousness that we developed. It's like our eyes are hyper aware of how we see ourselves or how we think other people see us. And it's usually with a negative lens. So we go into life with an awareness and an overall feeling of that. It may not be on a specific issue. It may be just an overall sense of that, just embarrassment. Humiliation is that deeper level, because humiliation is often that feeling of shame that often has a public attachment to it, something that happens in the presence of others. We feel humiliated over certain issues. We think if this is brought to light in this relationship, I would be totally humiliated. And humiliation is painful, extremely painful, because it's not just something you did wrong. It attaches to your identity. It attaches as an accusation to the very core of who you are. And that's what makes shame so difficult, is it connects to identity, belonging to the very essence of who you are, in really compromising it so that you don't land in the love and grace of God and in safe relationship with yourself as well as with other people. So that painful sense of humiliation and embarrassment. And I'm also going to put in here self-condemnation. Condemnation fuels shame because condemnation is a view of judgment with punishment. It's a focus on mistakes and flaws with punishment involved. And so people who live with shame, they're in a world of humiliation or embarrassment within themselves over certain areas of their life or in general. And there's that judgment and punishment view that they carry in themselves. Now, if we carry this within our own hearts, it's going to spill out in how we see other people. I've also noticed that many times we can be very gracious towards others in not being shame-filled in how we approach them. But in our own inner world, we don't give that at all. That's usually a sign of performance-based living, which means you'll try to give out to others, but when it comes to you, there's a lot of shame. Shame seeks to block the perspective of God's love, His grace, and His mercy. And those are key words. His love is who He is, embracing you, receiving you, taking you in. His grace is His operating power working in and through your life so that you rely on that, your foundation is built on that. His mercy, that's a beautiful word, is His loving compassion in the midst of your struggle and in the midst of your suffering. Shame, if you'll notice, wants to block you from this and keep you in a perpetual cycle of humiliation and embarrassment, because if you're in that, what are you going to do? You're going to block and hide. And if you have judgment and punishment constantly following your perspectives, you're going to stay in this self-condemned kind of state. It'll keep you prone to regret, guilt, shame kind of thinking. So then you can't see the issues of your life in a productive way where healing could happen. Many people just get stuck right here, so they often have a don't go there on a lot of issues and a lot of areas in your life. So a painful sense of humiliation, embarrassment, self-condemnation that will lead you to see yourself. Now, this can also lead you to see others, but I'm just starting with your perspective of you. To see yourself, this is an identity perspective, how you really see your sense of love, your sense of belonging, who you are in your identity. Shame wants to cloud how you see yourself and your experiences, so that when you think back at things that happened to you, things that you did, things you were involved in, things you saw, watched, it wants to cloud those experiences, cloud your identity under the atmosphere of embarrassment, humiliation, and self-condemnation, so that you're left seeing yourself and your life journey with great what? Disapproval and disdain. These are very powerful words. Now, it's not just disapproving an action. You could say, I don't approve of that action. Shame goes deeper. It goes into disapproval of who you are. It's a relational disapproval that creates a sense of disconnect. And if you have that within yourself, you become disconnected from being able to face the issues of your life that you need to face because it's too painful. It's too painful to see it, look at it, or even deal with it. That's why love, grace, and mercy is so incredibly important, because God's always working to heal those areas. But that disapproval will create that sense of, I don't want to feel that. It causes us to hide, to withdraw, to not deal, to not go there, right? Because of that pain. And then there's that disdain. That disdain is a deep sense of unworthiness. To communicate to you, you're not worth being loved. You're not good enough. You don't have worth and value. So therefore, it creates a sense of distance. And Satan knows this because he lives as an accuser of the brethren. That's what he does. And so part of his accusation is using this atmosphere of shame to be something that clouds your life, to keep you bound in these areas. And if you look at this, no wonder we struggle with healing of the heart and experiencing freedom and wholeness in our lives, because shame is blocking a lot of it. Now, there's three common areas that we can see shame in. You can see shame in a lot of different areas, but here are just some clues to get things started, because the definition of what I talked about in shame and how it affects, you can see it here, first of all, in how you see the past, how you see experiences in your history. If shame is touching those areas at all, it's going to make it so unproductive and almost impossible, because before you even enter into talking about the subject, you're already guarded and armed up, right? Because when we have shame, we get highly self-defensive and self-protective. In some ways, it's understandable because people can be very unsafe and they don't talk about things in productive ways, and they can have a shame-filled lens in how they talk to you, and it's incredibly painful. And so I found if we're going to deal with any issue of the past, we got to create safety, internal safety, experiencing love, experiencing grace. That God is not dismissing us. He's inviting us into those issues with Him. But any issue of the past, and a lot of times Christians can really struggle with even addressing the past. They can say, the past is the past. It's under the blood. I don't need to talk about it. But here's something I want to encourage you in, is that as a believer in Christ Jesus, we at some point should be able to get to the place where we can talk about our history. Because your history is part of your story. And your story is a part of your testimony. And God is weaving a story from your past, your present, moving into your future that has a thread of the work of Christ in all those things. So, but shame wants to disqualify us and keep us, so then we can't talk about them, then families can't heal, marriages can't heal, parents and children can't heal, churches can't heal, businesses can't heal, neighborhoods cannot heal because we cannot deal with things in the past through grace, through mercy, through love, through safety, because shame is clouding them. The second area has to do with how you are seen. And what I mean by this is how you see yourself. And many of you don't even feel like you were ever seen. You weren't noticed. You weren't treasured. So you always have this rejection thing following you that keeps the shame intact, is that you're not even seen to begin with. But then there's another layer of, how am I seen? How does the world see me? There's, how do I see myself? Am I even seen? And how does the world perceive me? Now, many times when we have shame, we can go so negative and dark on how we think people see us, and they may not even see us that way. But it's an internal thing that we carry, because that's what shame attacks. It's not just behavior, it's identity, making you one with all the flaws and mistakes and things in your life that you may have struggled with or past experiences. And that leads us to the third thing, which is you can see shame in how you process flaws, sins, weaknesses, failures, struggles, mistakes. You and I have all of these. We have all of these in our life. That God has not left us, He's with us. And He wants to, in relationship, heal us. But we have to learn how to have that safety internally so that we stop beating ourselves up, stop shaming ourselves. We also need to learn how to do this with other people, where we create an environment of grace by which sin can be addressed and we can be set free, by which weaknesses are not just looked at with disdain and disapproval, that we can embrace weaknesses and realize we're in a journey and God will use all things in our life. He'll even use areas of our failures and our mistakes to redeem them, to bring back life, to restore. We don't see beauty in those areas, but when we break free of shame, we start to see the beauty of what God can do in the midst of our brokenness. In understanding shame, it can be helpful for us to differentiate between guilt and shame. Guilt is based on our moral compass, our internal conscious of right and wrong, and that gauge. And so it has to do with behavior. I did something wrong. Now, I will say this isn't about guilt. This is about shame, but I will say this about guilt. For many believers, this guilt compass goes way off track and they feel guilt about stuff they shouldn't even feel guilt about. Their relationships are built on guilt. So much of their guilt covers their decisions and what they do because they haven't been loved in the grace and the mercy and kindness of the Father's love. And so that's a whole subject in itself. But from a basic standpoint, guilt says, I did something wrong, and it's a behavior thing that I did. Shame goes way deeper. It has to do with being seen, has to do with your identity. So it's not, I did something. It's you are something wrong. You are something wrong that makes you unlovable. And this gets into the deepest parts of our hearts. And this gets really challenging because just listen to that language. Those are the tender, vulnerable places of our life. It becomes very difficult if we don't have safety to break through these areas. Which leads me to my last point in this video, is that there's two factors in shame that we need to understand. One is the internal shame that we carry towards ourselves, and that impacts how we interact with the world. Then there's the external shame factors, which means how the world, how our community, how our family, how our relationships interact with us. And oftentimes what we want to do is we want to focus here on the external. We often say, you know what? I need people to be safer for me so that I can heal and grow. And what I want to encourage you in is focus your attention on only what you can control, because you can't control how the world's going to react to you, but you can control how you're going to set your compass. I've been asked at times, Mark, what's made the biggest difference in you being able to work through emotional, mental health issues and being able to work through brokenness? If I was to summarize it in one thing, it's being able to create an internal, safe environment in how I deal with myself, in how I see myself, and how I interact with my inner world. Do I allow God's love and grace to come in? Do I give that to myself? Or do I have a shame-based perspective? Am I hard on myself? Am I perpetually angry with myself? And so I really want to encourage you that the freedom from shame begins internally, because you could have the safest environment around you, but if you still have an internal shame reference, you're not going to be able to receive what other people have to offer you. And so what I want to encourage you is to begin to tune your senses into a much more kinder, patient, more lovingly accepting viewpoint of who you are and where you're at, because shame is attacking your identity. And God's coming and saying, I receive you and I accept you. The work of the new covenant brings us in that we don't have to be in shame. And we can actually be accepted in His beloved love and care and kindness. But shame is going to pitch a fit. So how can you begin to take your first step in being kinder towards yourself internally? How can you allow God to rewrite your story so that it's not based on shame, not based on beating yourself up, not based on that disdain, disapproval, contempt, and all that stuff? How can you begin to allow God to be a part of your story so that His love, grace, and mercy transforms your perspective, so that you can experience healing over the areas of your heart that desperately need His loving care and goodness? I pray this helps you, and I'm going to continue this series on shame in future videos. I look forward to that.